Hi everyone, we're on to Lecture 6 today, where I'll cover chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Pennebaker and Smythe's text. Don't forget, tonight by 10 p.m., you'll need to have completed quiz number 2 on Canvas. So chapter 3 of Pennebaker and Smythe's text has a lot of different concepts and claims to be made. I'll simply address some of the most central ones and encourage you to read the entire chapter closely. First, I think Pennebaker and Smythe want to foreground this distinction between catharsis and insight because they're claiming that free writing works because it promotes insight. So, first, let's start with catharsis. Catharsis is a Freudian term. Freud was thinking in terms of the psychology, human psychology, in terms of industrial metaphors, usually pneumatic type metaphors, like as if, you know, we experience emotions as a kind of liquid, and intense emotions can be thought of as sort of liquid under pressure, pent up in the body. And for him, catharsis was a very important topic, phenomenon, really, in which the client would kind of release this pent up psychic energy. You might think of it as venting steam, to use the kind of language that was used in the Industrial Revolution era psychology. We talk about the catharsis in terms of sort of getting something off of our chest, right? You might just sort of rant to a friend, and you might feel a little better after doing so, right? So Pennebaker and Smythe are wanting to make clear the claim that that's not what's going on in free writing. You're typically not having the kind of cathartic experience where you feel better after writing. In fact, just the opposite. You feel worse after writing. But over time, you feel better. Why, they claim? Because over time, in the process of free writing, you have brought language to an experience. You've come to terms with this experience, had some insights, are able to reorganize, rethink, maybe reframe that experience in language and concepts that make sense to you. And that's the value of free writing, in their opinion. Not in their opinion, I should say, their position, because it's a pretty empirically based position, but they're not sure. They're not sure why free writing works, but they do believe it's much more about insight than the kind of cathartic, just getting it off your chest, blowing off steam approach that some talk therapy would historically have valued. That's the main dichotomy I wanted to bring up in this chapter. The other central point in this chapter I want to discuss is just the letting go experience. That's crucial to free writing, and that really is what separates free writing from kind of journal writing and other kinds of writing. So be sure to read closely what Pennebaker and Smythe are saying are the qualities of the letting go experience. I mean, it's not just sitting around doodling in your journal, right? And thinking about things and writing them down and making lists of what you need to do tomorrow. No, I mean, free writing, at the core of free writing, is this letting go experience, which is, as they claim, it's like a trance, a kind of hypnotic or semi hypnotic trance like experience. I think of it oftentimes in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, Maslow's concepts, and one concept he had was a peak experience. And this has come down to us in more recent research, which in this concept of flow, right? So of sort of athletes or others who get in the zone and they get into like a peak experience. They're kind of free from inhibition. Everything's clicking. They're at a higher performance level than they should be. They're kind of not concerned with their own sense of self. They're just sort of they're in a kind of automatic state. Okay, and that's what Pennebaker and Smythe claim for the letting go experience, right? Is that you're letting go of your own concern, your sense of self, and you're in a kind of trance state. You might think of it even in terms of other areas where this is possible, right? certain forms of religious chanting, certain forms of dance, right? I mean, certain drum circles and dance circles get into a kind of hypnotic space where you really aren't. It's a real altered state of consciousness. Probably in our modern culture, the closest analog would be probably the rave scene. The rave dance scene. Now, of course, that's a drug-laced scene for the most part, but it doesn't need to be, and it wasn't always so. Um, that just in the music and in the dance, right? That there was a kind of peak performance that was happening, and then, of course, in the rave scene, then that started to get people tried to start enhancing that through Molly and other drugs. So anyhow, that's the world we should be thinking of when we think of free writing, right? It is something different than journal writing, and Pennebaker and Smythe are clear. Folks who are high disclosers in free writing, who experience this letting go stage, they have a lot better results than folks who don't. And so a good I would think goal for all of you this semester is to see if you can do it. That's something you can write about in your reflective essay at the end of the semester. Truly try to keep, that's why the writing protocol directions are as they are, right? It's like write whatever comes to mind. Don't let the pen stop. Don't censor yourself. Don't pay attention to grammar, spelling, style, society. Get into a kind of truly uninhibited flow state, and just you're almost at that state, not particularly even aware of what you're writing, right? You're just sort of writing on the page, words come out, you're not censoring them, you're not associating yourself with them yet. So that's a question for all of you. Can you, alone in some private space, sit out and really hit this letting go experience? If you can, great. You could discuss that in the reflective essay. And if you can't, that's something to discuss. And there might be a third category. It could be that you sense you can, but it's a little too scary. And that's a category worth discussing as well in your reflective essay. Okay, so those are some of the main concepts in Chapter 3 that I'd suggest you don't overlook, in addition to the other, your further reading of the chapter. Chapter 4, I won't have much to say. Pennebaker and Smythe simply move from general population, right, of healthy individuals from the early studies that worked with college students to clinical populations, folks who are suffering from some sort of chronic disease or illness. And then, so he's not really expanding, but moving from that general to clinical population. And then, right, the chapter just steps through category after category um, of diagnoses and discusses the extant research in expressive writing in that area, if there is any. And so you can see from my bulleted list, free writing has shown clinical improvement in a whole variety of physical and mental, concerns, from everything from asthma and HIV/AIDS to depression and trauma. And so I hope you find that kind of survey of the existing research interesting. And that's all I have to say about it. Fifth chapter, Writing to Clear the Mind. So here, Pennebaker and Smythe leave behind the world of therapy and clinical psychology and counseling and move into education. And again, in the field of education, in departments of English for 60, 70 years, professors have been aware of the relationship, between journal writing, free writing, and various forms of, academic improvement, and in terms of creativity and memory. The difference is, in the 90s, psychology started returning to those questions with an empirical mindset. And so then, instead of knowing it from firsthand experience and from teaching for 40 years, as many folks in the humanities knew it to be, the psychologists started finding scientific evidence for academic improvement from free writing. And oftentimes they just draw off of the studies from English as well. I think a good quote in this chapter that is important to remember is that they mention we don't need to talk to others to we don't need to talk to others to tell our untold stories. So if you remember last lecture, I was concerned. I didn't want you to think that the book was suggesting that we lower our privacy boundaries and just share with whomever because secrets are scary, secrets are dangerous. That would be a dangerous proposition to hold. And here they finally kind of come back to it and say, yeah, you don't need to share with others. Isn't it interesting? You can share with the page, your free writing page, and disclose not to another human, but disclose essentially to yourself, to your later self, as you're writing on the page. And so there hence the benefit of disclosure without danger, at least without social danger. I think a key point in this chapter is the second bullet. Pennebaker and Smythe sort of are becoming, they move to a higher level of abstraction here and look at what free writing might have in common with, what commonalities might exist across therapeutic and educational settings with regard to free writing. And bullet two is sort of their abstract principle, which is that by bringing language to an experience, writing helps people organize that experience, helps people understand that experience. And so when that is done in a therapeutic context, when they're trying to understand a past trauma, right, it makes sense that it would work well and you'd have empirical measures to show that. And when it's not a trauma, but simply homework, you're learning about the French Revolution, you can also then bring writing to that experience and organize it and understand it better. So that's the sort of overarching principle, I think, that unites free writing across the different domains that they look at. I offer in the third bullet just a sort of laundry list of improvement of benefits that the authors discuss. Writing is associated in various studies and in various ways with everything from short-term memory to the decrease of writer's block, decreasing of rumination, hence the title of the chapter, Clearing the Mind, and that writing is associated with improved problem solving. The fourth bullet is important. I hope they'll get into this in a later chapter, but that is, some folks think that only negative experiences can really have a traumatic effect on people, and I'm glad that they dispel this by saying, positive experiences can be pretty unsettling too, right? Especially if if you subscribe to a worldview or subscribe to a view of yourself that doesn't allow for such experiences, okay? And so in a way, positive experiences could be traumatic, right? If you don't believe that you are lovable and someone loves you, that can be a very difficult proposition. If you have a worldview that doesn't allow for some phenomenon in the world, and then you witness this phenomenon in the world, that's a difficult proposition. It can shatter a fundamental belief, whether about yourself or about the world. And in those cases, free writing so far seems to be helpful as well. And so I think that's helpful that they point out this larger scope of the free writing world. And then I just wanted to mention three cautions. I think they do a good job, better in this book, in this edition of the book than in the first edition that we used years ago. They do a good job in this book of articulating the limits to free writing and the ways in which you could use free writing in a way that would decrease your well-being instead of improve it. And so first, right, they caution against using free writing as a substitute for either social action out in the world or for having friends, right? You need your friends, you need to act out in the world, you need to behave in the world and sometimes move toward social action rather than free write. And so free writing can be a kind of compensation factor at times that might not be beneficial to your health. You can also use free writing just to sort of, and it's hard to describe, but I mean, they talk about in terms of intellectual writing. So if you're concerned, in the educational world, that's fine. But if you're concerned with your own well-being and you have a troubling issue, and you sort of use your free writing journal as just a way to sound smart, to use language to sort of defend your ego and to present your best version of yourself on the page. That's sort of cross purposes with the point of free writing, which is to just sort of do a kind of cognitive emotional vomit on the page. So they're saying don't get too caught up in yourself and start writing in high intellectual language if you're concerned about your health. You can read more about that if I'm not being clear, and then please email me if you have questions. And then last, there are folks in some studies where researchers have found that they were just using free writing as another place to vent, to complain, and that their complaining actually intensified because they really weren't moving toward insight or resolution. They just continue to complain further and dig themselves into a deeper kind of emotional hole through the free writing experience. So if you see yourself, for example, you know, over week after week, and your free writing journal doesn't start to address, higher order issues, right? If you're just sitting there, free writing day after day, complaining without sort of reframing or considering concepts that might cover it or seeing something from another person's point of view, right? If you're not making any progress, you might fall into that third category. And we'll see in a later research essay by Cheryl Fontaine this semester, there's a good kind of fourfold taxonomy of purposes in free writing, and that will kind of bring a finer head to this third bullet. I think that's all I have for the first three, for chapters 3, 4, and 5. I thought I would suggest that we end the lecture today with a free writing exercise. So the last lecture we did an unstructured free writing exercise. Unstructured means that you don't give yourself a topic to write about. You simply try to get in touch with and hold fidelity to the stream of consciousness flowing through your awareness. Structured, that was unstructured free writing. Structured free writing, on the other hand, is a case where you do give yourself a writing topic or a concept or an idea, and you write about that to some degree. Now, they offer a variation here, so that's kind of interesting. You could, not this exercise, but you could do an actual structured free write where you gave yourself a topic and then just tried to write uninhibitedly about it, but sort of monitoring what you're writing so that if you stray too far from the topic you gave yourself, you would bring yourself back to that topic. And yet, so you're still trying to write uninhibitedly about the topic, but if you change topics to something totally unrelated, you'd catch yourself and move back. That would be one form of structured free write. The example I offer here, which is straight from the text, is another form, and which is simply to really not do free writing in terms of longer, sentences or phrases, but just at a word or phrase level, right? So the authors suggest that you start by just getting out your free write journal, write the word stress at the top of the page, and then just start under that, almost like as a bulleted list, you could, or as a list, just write whatever word or topic comes to your mind. And then look at that next word and write whatever word or concept or topic comes to mind. So you don't give yourself permission to just write in detail and blurt it all out. You kind of stay at the level of associations, right? So you end up with a kind of a concept map or of associated words, all right? And you do that, you keep writing this, say, bulleted list, and where each word is what you thought of when you thought of the previous word on the list. Do that for a while, maybe 10 minutes, and then you look at that set of words, that family of words or phrases, and you try to see if there are any patterns here that might give you insight into, the nature of your stress. That can be helpful. For instance, I did this years ago, and what was interesting to me when I did it was, at the time when I was writing it, before I wrote, it felt like sort of the whole world, was dark and hopeless, right? And that I just wasn't going to make it in a direction I wanted to go. But my mood had spilled over to, vaguely thinking like, oh, I don't have good friends, I don't have a good life, all these kinds of things. But I hadn't really articulated it. So the difficulty of my life seemed everywhere, right? And then I did this exercise and I put stress at the top of the page and did my word association. And I really realized that it was really just there was one part of my life that was stressful, and that one part really was just generating anxiety for me, right? It wasn't a variety of emotions that were kind of assailing me at the time. It was just anxiety. And it had nothing to do with my relationships and my friends and my family. It had to do with one particular corner of my life. And so this exercise for me, for just that one example, helped greatly because it it circumscribed the problem. It showed that it wasn't my whole life. It gave me perspective, and after that, I could move forward, working on this issue of anxiety from this one element of my life. That's an example that worked for me. Who knows how it'll work for you and what topics you will choose, but I would suggest, perhaps using this exercise 3 or 4 times this semester, and see what it holds for you. And then again, you have more information to discuss in your reflective essay. That's all I have for this one. Good luck with the free writing practice and finishing the Pennebaker and Smythe book. Thanks.